You know, I work on a very, very broad spectrum of objects and in very different disciplines. And you know, when I was a child, actually, the people that I really looked up to were real pluralists. So I loved people like Andy Warhol, but even more so I liked Le Corbusier, and I liked Rodchenko from the Russian constructivists. So there was something that, and my father, who was a abstract painter, but also set designer for film and television. But my father was a real pluralist too, so he was painting, but he designed all the furniture in our home and actually made it himself. He designed dresses for my mother, and he would sew them, and they'd wear them. You know, she'd wear them to parties, and so he was. So when you're a child and you see your father being kind of capable of touching every part of our built environment, I had the same kind of premise. I was brought up with this notion of and I hate the term Renaissance man, but this kind of fact that you could kind of, in a way. So you know, for me, and in my office and the way I work is, in one day I'll be working on a hotel or a restaurant or a cafe. I'll be working at the same time maybe on something like a watch, and on the same day I'll be working on something very maybe even simple and banal like a pen. And for me, it's nothing better than to spend an 8, 9, 10-hour working day where I move constantly from micro to macro. So at this moment in time in my office, I'm working on about roughly 110 projects in a very broad spectrum of work in 39 countries. And the projects go from the extreme, so some very interesting and perverse things to some very, very democratic and simple products. One project I've been working on in Naples for 5 years is about to manifest itself, about to realize, and it's a subway station called Università. And it's been a long, kind of arduous but interesting project. And it's a crazy kind of station because I realized that it's a fantastic problem because you have literally about 4 or 5 minutes per person. So the minute they walk in to the minute they get on the train, I think on average it's something like 3 minutes. So when they go through the station, it's all about, because it's a university too, it's all about knowledge, it's all about kind of intellect, but it's also about this kind of connection of how Naples as a university is connected to the entire world and in turn to the entire universe. So it's full of kind of digital patterns and words that were all kind of created only in the last 30 years that never existed before in history, on all the tiles, and some very fascinating things. You know, you imagine, like, when the first project I ever worked on, I was 19, and it was during the summer. I started working at a telephony company. I designed business telephones over several summers. So I was very young, very naive, not really sure what I was doing. My background was really almost an engineering, industrial design background. So a lot of people don't know this about me because they see kind of a wild, creative place. They see like pinks and colors, and so they just assume that I'm I don't know, a bit eccentric, I guess. But the reality is my history was that I spent 8 years in Toronto designing products for the military, products for Black & Decker. I did mammographers, X-ray tables. And when you make these kind of products, these industrial design products, I did snow shovels, really products that most people don't realize are designed. In 1993, I moved to New York to try to open my own practice. I was teaching associate professor at Rhode Island School of Design, and they fired me. And I think by about 1996, I got a phone call from Portland, Oregon, asking me if I'd like to go and be head designer at Nike, or at least in charge of some of the design team at Nike. And they offered me a phenomenal salary, something, I don't know, I should have this on camera, but I was really shocked. And at the same time, I immediately, right at that moment on the phone, realized here was my tipping point or my turning point. I either take on a job for security, you know, just kind of fit in to the world, and you know, which is fine because some people are good for that. I wasn't the type. I'm much too, I don't know, I think artistic, and also at the same time, I want to do too much to have put myself to work with a singular company. And I rejected the call within a minute. And I remember that feeling of that moment, that apex, that tipping point where my career is starting to happen, and I'm going to pursue this. You know, design and fashion, there's a lot of discussion and I think a lot of controversy about the differences of design and fashion. So if I'm a designer, for example, the first thing I have to consider in a product, let's say, is possibly
the method of production, the kind of materials. Maybe it's polycarbonate or it's some sophisticated material. So for me, it's rare in the fashion business. You could almost argue that in fashion we have 90% kind of stylists, stylistes, and the other 10% there's real designers. And the designers are people maybe like Issey Miyake and others who really trying to move the profession, or let's say have evolution and progress, not always looking back. And then we have to say that in the fashion business, and I would love to actually show you something, and this is something my wife and I discuss a lot actually, is that, what, high heels, and I've said this many times in lectures, high heels for me a lot of times are a way of men keeping women subordinate. But you say, well, okay, if you're going to wear high heels, and of course we're all used to them looking elegant and sexy and beautiful and all these things, well, why aren't they comfortable? After all these years, producing high heels for a century, and we are not making comfortable high heels. So I've been for the last 10 years kind of obsessed with this idea, and I did a project with this Brazilian company, Melissa, to do a high heel, but for me this high heel is very much about the moment. I can stick it in the washing machine, I can walk in the ocean with it, this thing will practically last forever, and it's made of injection of 3 different polymers. Soft, a stronger than anything you could imagine, and something in here which is like a spring. So in actual fact, when you walk, there's some softness and movement in it. And a lot of women that wear this tell me they're the most comfortable shoe they've ever worn. Now I'm thinking, well, this is industrial design, this is not fashion design. Of course I'm making something that's interesting, beautiful. And there's been some interesting things like this relationship of, for example, Cole Haan got together with Nike and they're now putting air in some shoes. And these things are starting to happen. This to me is what the fashion industry should be doing.